there's something really transformative about that. Someone who just really gets you, and when you can feel that. And
Yeah.
so listening in a lot of ways is one of the greatest gifts we can give other people. All right. Welcome everyone to Making Yourself Clear. I'm Chris.
I'm Patrick.
And we will be exploring topics we find interesting on the overarching themes of clarity of thought and communication. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 levels of listening.
If we're looking to improve the way that we communicate with people, one of the key pieces is the way that we listen, right? It's not just about what I have to say, but it's about what's being communicated back to me. And being able to listen effectively is a huge piece.
Absolutely. And we were talking about this before the show. We take it for granted that people would see the value in getting good at listening, but it might be worth saying a few words just to really underscore the point.
There are lots of people out there who feel like they're excellent communicators who have terrible listening skills. So I feel like it would be an oversight for us to talk only about the way in which we communicate and not to cover the way that we listen to other people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I would argue that listening is the more important part of communication. Putting words together that represent your thoughts and ideas is one thing, but in a dialogue back and forth, it's really getting where the other person's coming from and being attuned to them allows you to make sure that what you say next is actually relevant to the other person.
Yeah.
And so you get in touch with where are they coming from, where are they at, and it'll inform what you say and make the conversation much better. So that's one thing.
My old high school English teacher used to always say, there's a reason you have 2 ears and 1 mouth.
We've all had the experience, I would imagine, of talking to someone and then getting the sense that they're not listening. Either in real time, you can just tell they're distracted. Maybe they're looking at their phone.
Yeah.
Their mind's wandering. They're just not present. Or the thing they say next just doesn't resonate at all with what you were trying to communicate. And it can feel like almost like getting T-boned in an intersection with your car. Like you're headed this way, and then what they say feels like it's just coming out of left field. And you realize you're totally disconnected. And that's like it's a lost opportunity. Communication is one of the main ways we connect with other people. And when you're vibing and you're on the same page as somebody, it's a real source of closeness and connection and understanding. And that's like, it's a way that we bond and feel like we're not alone in the world.
Yeah.
Well, and conversely, if you've had the experience of someone who's a really good listener, especially if you're sharing something that matters.
Yes.
Maybe you're going through something, it's a difficult time, and you've got just someone that's really good at just getting you.
Yeah.
And there can be something super healing and nourishing, and there's something really transformative about that. Someone who just really gets you, and when you can feel that. And so listening in a lot of ways is one of the greatest gifts we can give other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I can remember times in my life where I have had, a dysregulation in one way or another, or like major conflict, and just sitting down with someone who was willing to listen and who listened on that level of just deep understanding. And there's a sense of being deeply felt and deeply seen when someone listens well.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially given how rare it is, it's like you notice it.
Yeah.
You can feel it. And in fact, there are whole professions built around this. Therapy, right? Therapists' jobs mostly are to listen. And we both do various forms of coaching, and it's very similar. Most of that job is listening. And often if you listen well enough, you don't have to say much.
Correct. Yeah. It's about what you say and when you say it. And the way to find those moments is through listening.
Yeah. So maybe without further ado, we're going to dive into one framework for thinking about different levels of listening. This is called the 5 levels of listening. And each level represents like a category shift in terms of the quality of your listening.
Yeah. And I would argue the first 2 levels that we're going to talk about here don't really represent listening in any way, shape, or form. It's kind of, you sort of have to get to level 3 before you're actually listening to a person, I would argue.
Absolutely. But the first 2 are in the model because that's where a lot of people live a lot of the time.
We spend a lot of time in levels 1 and 2. Yeah.
So why don't we dive in and start with level 1 of listening, which is called interrupting.
Yeah. So interrupting, pretty straightforward, right? If you're having a conversation with a person and they're talking and you're just waiting for them to shut up, and then rather than wait for them to finish, you just You step over them. It's one of the most common forms and one of the least effective forms of listening.
Yeah. And often if you're the listener, what this can feel like for you is, oh, somebody gets partway through what they're going to say, and you have this thought like, oh, I know where they're going with this. I know what they're going to say next. They don't need to say it. And then you just jump in with your response.
Yeah. It might be that you feel you're really good at finishing other people's sentences. I have some people in my life who are like that, right? They think that they know what the next sentence is going to be and they finish my sentences for me. And then I have this sense of like, well, no, that's not where I was going with that. So, yeah.
Sometimes it is, which is interesting. Like sometimes people do finish each other's sentences and it works, but it's risky because you may hear the first part. I've had this experience a lot where I'm trying to explain some view I have of a complex topic and I'm trying to build to it in stages. And so I'll start with like some background context, and then the other person assumes they know where I'm going with it. And then they respond to that.
Right.
And I get frustrated because it's like, no, I'm just getting warmed up here. And where I'm actually trying to go with this is way more interesting.
Yeah.
But now I don't get to go there. And so I'm frustrated. I feel like the thing I was actually trying to communicate was blocked or thwarted.
So there's a feeling like your thoughts weren't valued.
It doesn't give the person, the speaker, the opportunity to really complete their thought, and it feels jarring. It can feel disrespectful or dismissive.
Right.
And this is sadly the most common thing, and you probably see this all the time, especially. And maybe you do it. Maybe you do the interrupting. Maybe you've been interrupted, and it's habitual, right? And in a group setting, it can result, or even one-on-one, it can result in the person with the more dominant personality taking up all of the airtime and all the space in the conversation, and the other person just feels diminished or pushed to the side.
Yeah, I can think of, a few dinner conversations where I've gotten to the point where I've just sort of been like, okay, well, I'm going to let them have the conch and they can have the conversation, and I'll wait for dessert.
Yeah, exactly. So level 1 is interrupting. Doesn't count as listening, but it's probably the most common thing that we do when we think we're listening. So don't do that.
Our second level is waiting. So waiting for someone to finish their sentence. Kind of similar to interrupting, but there's a little more courtesy there. So you're letting someone actually finish their thought, finish their sentence. It's a little better than level 1, but then you're still not really listening, right?
Yeah, it's more polite because you're not literally interrupting the person, but what you are doing is they're speaking, but your attention is internal. You're in your own head formulating what you're going to say next, which means you're not paying attention to them, or at best you're paying partial attention to them.
Right.
And half of your bandwidth or more is in your own head conjuring up what you're going to say next. So you're mentally preparing and just waiting for your turn.
Yeah. So you might be getting some of the nuance and some of the substance of what it is they're saying, but like Chris just said, you're waiting your turn. You've got this really great thing that maybe halfway through their third or fourth sentence you thought of, and oh, I can't wait to say this. I'm just gonna, hurry up. And then you get to say your really clever piece.
Right. And if you're the speaker, you can sense when this is going on too. Like you probably appreciate not being interrupted, but you can sense that the listener isn't really engaged and they're more interested in what they want to say than they are interested in really receiving and processing and digesting what it is you're trying to communicate.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely come across people like that in my life where they're there and they're but there's almost like an emptiness in their eyes because they're focused on what it is they're going to say. And then as soon as I close my mouth, just like out with whatever great thing that they've been holding on to, maybe it's, a clever witticism or
whatever point they want to make
next. But it really gives me the sense of like, oh, this is not a conversation. It's just you waiting for your time.
You're trading monologues more than you're actually in a dialogue. And there's body language that goes with this too. Like maybe you're looking impatient and you're kind of like tense, or you might be tapping your foot, or like there's a sense of impatience in the other person.
Right.
Because they want to be interrupting and they're exercising discipline to bite their tongue and not interrupt.
Yeah. Yeah. They're being a good interrupt. They're showing a lot of discipline. Right.
It's like, so but they're having to force themselves against their will to just not talk. And they still don't actually want to hear what you have to say. And it's evident. So technically they're not interrupting, but it's a long way from quality listening because they would rather be talking.
Yeah. So this is another one that shows up very commonly, right? Those first two levels, like Chris said earlier, probably the most common that we come across. And then we've got our third level, which is mirroring. So,
Yeah. And mirroring, basically, this is where listening actually starts. This is the first level that I would consider really listening in any meaningful way. And what defines listening is you actually hear the content of what's being said and get it well enough that you could paraphrase or repeat back to them what they said. And then they would agree that, okay, yes, that is what I said, or that's the gist of what I said. You might even ask questions like, okay, here's what I'm hearing you say. Is that right?
yeah. So, I mean, literally mirroring, right? Here's what I heard you say. You might rephrase it in your own words, but here's what I heard you say. And then checking in. The check-in's a huge part, right?
Yeah.
Did I actually get a sense of what it is you're saying? And that's super validating as the speaker, is just to have someone say like, did I actually get you? Or is there another piece that I'm missing? Because I'd love for you to clarify, and I'd love to continue to listen, more and listen better.
Yeah. And by doing that, now you're actually demonstrating an interest in what they're saying and an interest in really understanding them, because you're feeding it back to them and giving them an opportunity to confirm, yes, you got that right. Or maybe, no, not quite. Or yes, but you missed a piece.
Yeah.
And it's leaning in with that curiosity and a genuine desire to really get what they're saying, and giving them an opportunity to go back and forth until they feel like, yeah, you got it.
Yeah.
So this is great. It requires more focus than the other two.
Yeah. Super validating for the person who's speaking at this point. And this is where being in conversation with someone starts to become enjoyable, right?
Yeah.
When they're actually listening and they're getting a sense for what it is that you're feeling.
If you've done any kind of couples therapy or communication training, this is a really common technique. Couples therapists will do this all the time. Two partners come in and they've been struggling to communicate, and they will facilitate this kind of mirroring exercise where one partner will speak for a while, the other one will mirror back, and they'll take turns. And this alone can go a long way to really breaking dysfunctional gridlock in communication.
There can be a bit of a pitfall there. It can feel like if you're just kind of parroting back what the person said to you. So
you want a bit robotic.
Yeah. So I think paraphrasing is a big part of mirroring, because if you're paraphrasing, then it's not so much you're just parroting back what they said, but there's actually some interplay there.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because if you're just repeating the literal words, it feels a bit weird. But if you're saying, here's what I think I'm hearing you say, and you say it in your own words, maybe it's a little more concise, super effective.
Yeah.
And it's a huge step forward from levels 1 and 2.
Absolutely.
And we've got 2 more levels to get to.
2 more levels to get to. So level 4 is sensing. So what do we mean when we say sensing, Chris?
Yeah. So sensing, it includes everything we talked about under mirroring. But now you're not just, as the listener, you're not just able to repeat back the content, the literal meaning of what they said, but you're more attuned, not just to what they're saying, but how they're saying it. So that would include body language, their tone of voice, their energy level, all of these emotional cues. Maybe they frowned, maybe they smiled, maybe they had a little twinkle in their eye when they got to a certain point. And so now you're attuned to that, and you might not just say, hey, here's what I heard you say, but it's, hey, you seemed really moved by that. Or you seemed really excited by this piece. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So there's mirroring in there, but it's also those other pieces. Like, so this is when we're really heavily involved in the discussion, in the conversation, and there's not so much distraction. We're really focused on the other person in this case.
As the speaker, you will feel a different level of presence in the listener.
Yeah.
They're not just getting the content, they're leaning in. There's probably more eye contact, and you'll just feel them with you in a deeper way, because now they're attuned to the emotional content. They're really trying to get you in the fullness of your experience, not just the semantics of the words you strung together.
Yeah. Well, and what's nice about that too is when we're doing that sensing piece is it can reflect back to a person something that maybe they didn't know that they were even communicating, right? Like there are those subtle pieces of body language, those little nuances like, hey, I noticed when you were speaking that, you furrowed your brow or your eyes dropped or whatever it is that you notice, your shoulders slumped. People might not even realize that about themselves, that, hey, when I talk about my work or my father or my relationship or whatever it is.
And one way this shows up is, say someone comes to you and they're contemplating a decision or a choice, and they're looking for advice. What should I do? Which job should I take? Right. And maybe they've got 3 options on the table, and they're describing each of them.
Mm-hmm.
You may notice that they have a lot more energy around one of the options. And with the other two, they're doing the rational pros and cons thing, right? This one maybe has more stability and it's closer to home and blah, blah, blah. But if their tone is flat, and then they talk about another job where maybe it's less practical. And so in the pros and cons on a piece of paper, it doesn't seem as good. But if their energy is much more electric,
Yeah.
you can reflect that back to them and say, well, I noticed that as you were describing job number one, it was all the rational reasons why it's good on paper, but
That's
the
right.
tone seemed kind of monotone. And then when you talked about job number two, which maybe is a bit more of a stretch or a bit out of left field, you got really excited.
Yeah.
Does that resonate with your experience?
And then the other person at that point might have a realization that they wouldn't have had otherwise because of the depth of your listening.
That's right. In this way, you're really helping other people gain some insight about themselves. One of the quirks about being human is it's always so much easier for us to read other people than it is for us to see ourselves clearly.
Absolutely.
And this is where you can really be valuable to somebody, not necessarily by telling them what to do, but by just reflecting back to them what you're reading in between the lines or in their emotional content as they talk about it.
Yeah. And so that sort of transitions into this final level of listening, the fifth level, which is the highest level of listening, which we call transformative listening. So when we're listening in such a way that it actually transforms the conversation, or it transforms, the speaker or potentially the listener, or both, or the relationship between the two of you. So something is transformative within the conversation.
Yeah. Now, this level of listening is by far the least common and often involves some level of training and practice to really cultivate this level of attunement.
And even with that, like there's a level of mastery there that it really, it takes a lot, like you said,
and it's hard to describe for that reason.
Yeah.
Because up until now, you've probably had the experience of being listened to at each of the first levels. And you may even have listened to someone else at one point or another at each of the first four levels.
Mm-hmm.
To describe level 5, it might start to get a little bit esoteric and kind of hard to pin down, but we'll give it a shot. We're going to do the best we can.
I feel like what you mentioned with the level 4, with the job piece, that's sort of moving into that level 5. That's that transformative. Like, hey, I noticed when you were speaking about this, you were flat, you were monotone, and then when you were speaking about the other job, you seemed very excited. It was something that you were excited to talk to me about, right? What do you think that means?
Right.
And so when you offer that question up, what do you think that means? Well, now you're transforming the conversation, and you're transforming that person's relationship to the information that they've just shared with you. So they've given you this information like, well, what do you think I should do? And then you're giving it back to them saying like, here's what I heard. I don't know what you should do, but based on this information, what do you think you should do?
Right. Here's what I noticed as you were sharing that information. And then you're inviting them to reflect on it. What do you think that says? Is there an insight to be had there? And you're prompting them to do some deeper reflection. So that's a good taste of the beginnings of level 5 listening. You can even go deeper where the way we present ourselves externally, right, which is how we're showing up,
right,
our energy, our body language, and that's what I would call kind of our external self, right? The self we're presenting to the world. And it may even be like, if we're being authentic, that's the self that we're experiencing ourselves to be in that moment. That's not always our higher self. So transformative listening is when you can listen through that and really, it's almost like you're peering into someone's soul and getting at the essence of what's most important to them and what's driving them. And they may not even be able to see it. It might not even be on their radar screen.
Yeah.
So
I can remember a situation where I was having a conversation with a client, and she was talking to me about, it was a job, and she was saying, I've been offered this job. It's really exciting. But they're asking me to come in for 5 days out of the week, and I can really only do 4, but it's a great opportunity and I should really take it. But it's going to mean that I can't spend time with my son. She had a son who was 6 years old, and she really wanted to spend time with him. And so I posed the question back to her. I said, well, because she was a coach too. And I said, well, what would you say to someone if they had come to you and said, I'm going to have to make sacrifices where I don't get to see my family on the basis that I want to see them. I don't get to see my son grow up the way I want to see him grow up. And she had an epiphany there where she was like, I didn't even realize I was saying that. But yeah, I feel she felt, truly heard in that moment. She said that, and she said, thank you. And then she went back and she said to them, I can't take the job. I have to spend time with my son. And then they came back to her a week later and said, hey, we're willing to meet whatever concessions you need.
Fantastic. So I think that's maybe the key ingredient, Patrick, that you just illustrated, which was something in the way that you were listening to her. You saw something about her that was deeply valuable that she hadn't even seen in herself, even though the words came out of her mouth.
Mm-hmm.
It was there, but she wasn't aware of it.
Right.
And so that's like one of those aha moments, one of those transformative insights that can change a person's either decision, or in some cases, it can change the course of their life.
Yeah, well, and it's something that I've heard you say, and it's something that I've heard some of our other colleagues say. Listening to the person's commitment, right? So listening through the words for the commitment. It's you had mentioned before we started recording, actually. If someone comes in and they're upset or they're angry, if you're listening for their commitment, you might hear something that past that anger that is, well, oh, okay, now I know what you're committed to, and then if you can bring that to them, you can transform the conversation from a place of anger, and maybe you can transform that anger into, passion. Maybe like that frustration might be coming from a point of passion, right?
Absolutely. And this is where we talked a minute ago about our external self. Somebody might show up really angry about something, and it's like they're just full of rage, and there's a complaint. And if you're on the other end of it, even if they're not complaining about you, what you see first is the anger, right? And the level 4 listening might say, oh, I can see that you're really upset about this.
Yeah.
Right. And that's accurate. But if you get stuck at the superficial level of the anger, that's one thing. But listening beyond that, why is a person angry? Well, there's something that they value that feels like it's being threatened or violated.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe there's a principle or just a personal value or a commitment they have to making things better.
Right.
And most people have experienced something like this in the workplace, where maybe the dynamic gets dysfunctional over time within a group. Maybe a project's running behind, or maybe there's a reorg and now there's all this bureaucracy and friction, and people get really upset and the morale tanks, and then your star performers are angry. And if you're just interacting with them in response to the anger, you miss the broader point. And then you might get defensive and say, well, we're doing the best we can as management here, and you need to just blah, blah, blah. And now you're pushing back and forth.
Right.
Because you're interacting with the initial presentation, which is the anger. Whereas instead of interacting on that level, like a really good leader would say something like, hey, what I hear is that you have a deep commitment to something better. You have a deep commitment to quality, and that the way we've been operating is falling short of that. And now you've touched their heart because you've gotten to the value and the commitment and the positive thing that they're standing for.
Right.
And they may not even know that because they're overcome with anger. That's what we feel first is, this sucks. This is broken. What I hear is you're really committed to doing things better.
Yeah.
And I want to support you in that. And that's a completely different conversation from pushing back on the initial anger.
That's a perfect example of transforming the conversation, right?
Yeah.
I've taken that piece where I've got what could have been a conflict, and I've transformed that conversation from a conflict into, okay, well, how can we work together? And now we're back on the same team, and it might take some work, but I'm here and I'm willing to, and then you see that person soften, and you see that person see that acknowledgement, and that, okay, yeah, we're on the same team. So now we can work together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it has the conversation go very differently. So it transforms the trajectory of the conversation, but it can also really shift a person's emotional state and get them out of the anger and get them into a place of inspiration.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of complaint mode and problem mode, it's, solution mode. You're right. I am committed to something better.
Yeah.
And you might often see like an exhale, like, there's almost a sigh of relief, a feeling of being unburdened when somebody gets you on that level.
And then you can get to work, and then you can actually do something because you've put the anger somewhere. It's been heard.
Yes.
And now you can shift into a different gear, and you can take all of that frustration and anger and use that as fuel for something
to do something good.
Greater. Yeah.
Let's look at Martin Luther King, right?
Right.
Civil rights movement. There was lots to be angry about.
Yeah.
And people were angry, and justifiably so.
Yes.
What he did that was really transformational was, instead of saying, here's all the things that suck, his speech was not, I have a complaint.
Right.
It's,
Yeah.
I have a dream.
Yeah.
And that's, you probably can't get a better example than that.
I think that's a perfect way to put that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you do this transformative listening? Because we just described what it is, what it feels like. If a person's aspiring to practice listening at that level, how can they do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one of the key pieces is what we identified earlier, listening for the commitment. So if there's a way where you can identify that small nugget is, what is this person committed to? Okay, I hear the words that they're saying, but what's underneath it, right? Really drive at that. What is, and that's something that you can try and clarify. Like, I hear you saying X. What I think that means is Y. Am I in the right ballpark?
How does that land? Does that resonate with you?
Does that resonate? And you might be totally off the mark, but when you're asking for clarification, at least that person gets the sense that like you're committed to the conversation and you're committed to listening to them.
Yes. And if you're listening for what they're committed to, you also want to be listening for their higher self. Because if someone comes in hot and heavy and they're angry, I could say, well, it sounds like you're committed to being right.
Right.
Which might be part of it, but that's deeper than that.
So that's where you have to check yourself, right?
Yeah. What's the positive value? So one way of looking at this transformative listening is there's 3 principles that you can try to apply here. And they're belief, interest, and space. So belief is you're believing in what's best in that other person. So this is assuming positive intent.
Right. We've talked about that before.
Looking for the virtue, looking for the thing that you could align around. What's the value? What's the good thing here? Even if it's hard to see and you've got to really squint because there's like, they're coming at you with a nasty gram.
Yeah.
What's the good thing that is buried underneath all of this?
Right.
And then the other belief is that it's in there and they can access it, right? Like you don't need to fix them or change them or tell them what to do or anything. It's just by listening well enough and conducting yourself in the conversation in a particular way, they can access it and believing that they can and that ultimately they want to.
Yeah. And that's always going to be best anyway when someone comes up with their own solution. Not telling them, not leading them, but just sort of
listening for it.
Yeah.
So we talked about belief. The next one is interest. And another way of describing what this is just deep, genuine curiosity, where you're not jumping to a conclusion or an assumption about where they're coming from. You stay curious and you're trying to get their experience. We often truncate this process because someone will say a few things and it'll be similar enough to an experience we've had. And then we project onto them, oh, when I had this thing happen that was similar, here's how I felt, therefore that must be how they feel.
Right.
And sometimes that's right. Sometimes it gets you in the ballpark. But if you can stay curious a little longer and ask more questions. Oh, what was that like for you? Can you describe that? Oh, okay. And what was that like?
Yeah. Staying in that inquiry until the person comes to their own conclusions, where you're not spoon feeding it to them and you're not giving them what you think they need to hear. You're just staying in that, staying inquisitive, staying curious.
Yeah. And you're not trying to lead them where you think they should go.
Yeah. That's a big
questions, right? You're actually just listening and with curiosity and reminding yourself that I may not get where they're coming from. Here's an example. My father died 8 years ago. And obviously in the days and weeks afterwards, like that was mostly what was on my mind. We were grieving. And so whenever I saw somebody that I hadn't seen since it happened, like they would adopt a very compassionate, sympathetic, like, oh, how are you? And then that was very much appreciated because I felt cared for and loved. And after a certain amount of time went by, like maybe it had been a month or 6 weeks, and then I would run into someone else that I hadn't seen, and they would still come at me with that same energy. And that might not have been where I was at in that moment because I've had 6 weeks to grieve. And at this point in the process, like, there were waves where grief would come over me, but there was a lot more time where life felt more like it was back to normal. And somebody well-intended, just because it's the first time that we've seen each other since it happened, they would get into that caretaking kind of stance with me. And it didn't resonate because they didn't take the time to really read where I was at in that moment.
Right.
I made an assumption and projected, oh, his father just died or died recently, therefore he must be grieving, without actually looking and saying, well, where's he at now?
Yeah.
And is that what's present for him in this moment? and then interacting with that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So making the assumption of, oh, I need to take care, rather than saying like, how are you? How are things? Where are you at?
Yeah,
Pretty
absolutely.
simple questions, but when it's something that heavy, tough to ask.
Yeah, and we just need to remind ourselves not to assume that we know what someone else is experiencing in any particular moment.
Yeah.
Even if it seems obvious, it never hurts to stay curious.
And then the last piece was space. So what we mean when we say space is, again, so staying in that inquiry, staying curious, and giving the person space to say what it is they need to say and feel what it is they need to feel, and move through that, and not stop them and say like, hey, you're the emotions that you're feeling right now are wrong or bad, but just giving space and holding space for
Yes.
a person.
Yeah. If you've asked a question and they don't have an answer right away, lingering in that silence and giving them some room to explore.
That's one of the best things that I've learned in having conversations and coaching people, is what goes on in the unsaid. There's more happening there than you might imagine. If you just give people a chance to pause, reflect, think, that silence is golden, because that's where they're doing all of that processing, right? It's not just go, go, go all the time. We need time to sit back and think. So
yeah,
if you ask a question, you don't need to step on that silence.
Absolutely. If someone is searching within, and this comes up in coaching calls all the time, I'll ask a question and I can tell that they're wrestling with it and they're searching inside themselves for some insight. And if they're engaged in that process, I don't say a word.
Yeah.
I just hold space and let them do it. Because if I speak up too soon and say something, it might derail that process for them.
Yeah.
And especially if they're going through something that might be uncomfortable, there can be an impulse to try to break the tension.
Yes.
But it's creative tension and you don't want to break it. You want to let them sit with it and grapple with it, because that's where real breakthroughs and insights can happen.
Absolutely. One of the things that we do when we do step on that space is we give people an out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So someone might be wrestling with something that's difficult for them to deal with. And if we break that tension, if we break that silence, then we give them the ability to snake their way out of the conversation. And ultimately that's not going to be best for
it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
There's another way that people do this as well, which is if you're holding space for someone who's going through a rough time and you can tell they're suffering or they're upset, people will often want to say something to break the tension, but that's not necessarily for the other person's benefit.
Yeah.
What it really communicates is, I'm uncomfortable with your emotions, and therefore I want you to shift out of that emotion because it's making me uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that's really selfish, because often what we need most when we're struggling is just someone to be with us, to just say, you know what, I'm with you. You're not alone, and it's okay for you to be feeling what you're feeling right now.
Yeah. And that's a tough place to come from. Like I have some friends who, anytime there's any kind of discomfort, they need to crack a joke. Yeah. They need to just like get back into happy. That's just how they process it. That's how they deal with it. So
that's how they avoid it.
Well, that's how they avoid it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So belief in the other person's goodness, and that there's some higher intention or commitment or value underlying the initial presentation. That's one. Deep interest and curiosity.
Yep.
And then space, giving them space, holding space for them, and just allowing the conversation to breathe and being comfortable sitting in silence while being deeply connected and present with the other person.
Yeah. The solution that a person comes up with in the moment when they're given that space or when they're having the conversation is always going to be better than the one that's imposed on them from the outside, the one that we try and give them, the one that we try and lead them to.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, as a listener, you can really facilitate breakthroughs for people and lasting transformation or change.
Mm-hmm. And people will feel like it's genuine. It'll feel like it's a genuine interaction. It'll feel like it's genuinely based in the belief that people are resilient, people are intelligent, and people know what's best for themselves.
So that's an overview on the 5 levels of listening. Maybe this is a good segue for a plug. If you are dealing with something, maybe it's a decision you haven't made or an issue, an experience you're going through, a challenging time, this is where reaching out to a coach or a therapist or someone who's actually trained to listen at that level can be incredibly valuable. So if that's you and you're interested, feel free to reach out to Patrick or myself at the coordinates in the show notes, and we'd be happy to help.
Okay, so just to summarize it, we've got our 5 levels of listening: interrupting, waiting. We've got
Mirroring.
sensing, and then
transforming.
transformation.
As always, we hope this was useful, and thanks for tuning in.